Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever and whenever you are, and welcome to another episode of Take the Points, a true underdog podcast. Hey, everybody, you have Robbie here. It is Tuesday night. As you can tell, it is just me on the pod tonight. Wilson and Steve and I decided to kind of split up this week, given all that's going on in Detroit sports. Tonight's episode is going to be specifically focused on me talking about the Detroit Lions in the upcoming draft, which is only 48 hours away. Wilson and Steve should be on tomorrow night on Wednesday to give some thoughts on the Pistons, their performance in game 1 and 2 versus the Knicks, which we are currently tied in the series 1-1. Give a little preview of game 3 and 4 coming up here in Detroit on Thursday and Sunday. There's just so much going on right now. The Tigers are playing incredibly well. I was at the game last night, the first game against the Padres, which they won 6-4. A little bit late getting on here tonight, watching them unfortunately drop a 2-0 loss today. Nick Pivetta pitched incredibly well for the Padres, but still just a really great start for the Tigers. So just so much going on in sports. We just felt like it would be a good idea this week to really kind of separate out some of the discussion points we're going to talk about. My goal here tonight is to give you, maybe a 30, 40-minute preview of my perspective heading into the NFL draft. Maybe I'll be the draft whisperer here, channel my inner Brad Holmes, see if I can maybe read through some of the tea leaves that we're hearing coming out of, the beat writers for the Lions, some of the articles that are out there, and some of Brad Holmes' comments himself. And yeah, so that's kind of going to be the focus for tonight. So like I said, Steven Wilson will hopefully be recording an episode tomorrow on Wednesday that should drop on Thursday, kind of talking about the Pistons. So proud of my Pistons, proud of my boys. I'm proud to say that I'm not a bandwagon fan. I've been with them since the beginning, rode them through the tough years. Really, really great to see them playing so tough against the Knicks. But, one thing about this Detroit Pistons team that we've seen, and for those not on video tonight, I'm rocking my grit hat. And why am I rocking my grit hat? Because watching this Pistons team has reminded me so much of our Detroit Lions, just kind of transitioning to the upcoming draft. And what's made this Lion team so great is just really that kind of Detroit versus everybody mentality. Their players, the general manager, the coaches, the fans, really all embody that same mantra, which is kind of us versus the world. And I think it's been really, really fun to watch that with the Pistons. But I think the Detroit Lions are at a pivotal point. And I was thinking today in the past couple of days, how do I want to approach this pod? And how do I want to talk about how I'm feeling about the Lions? Because I don't know about all of you out there listening, but, I'd say I'm feeling nervous for what's to come. I'm feeling scared that the Lions missed their window, but I'm also feeling excited that this was still a 15-2 team that has so much ahead of them, so much potential that, that Super Bowl still could be within reach. And I'm sure many Lions fans maybe are feeling the way that I am of, this last 2 to 3 years have been an incredible ride. Just after years and years of incompetence, having a team that couldn't make the playoffs, didn't really have a bright future, constantly changing kind of leaders at the top of the organization. We've really entered into a new phase of Detroit Lions fanship that I'm not sure that, outside of, maybe the early 90s when or I should say the 90s timeframe when the Lions were, on the precipice of maybe a Super Bowl then, most people in my generation haven't ever felt that for the Lions, which I think is unique. And what I was kind of thinking about with the Lions, just, kind of before we jump into the draft, just kind of looking at their offseason is you've heard a lot from kind of Brad Holmes and I think Dan Campbell on understanding the kind of importance it is to continually try to make your team better. And I think everyone sticks to this comment that Dan Campbell had after the unfortunate loss in San Francisco, which I talk about a lot, when he said, he told the guys teary-eyed in the locker room, I told them that may have been our shot. That may have been our moment. And unfortunately, they obviously didn't come through. And I don't want to jump into all kind of what went wrong there. But I think it was a moment of honesty and probably vulnerability from Dan Campbell, which we see a lot of him being realistic as a player. Is you're just not really sure what the next year is potentially going to bring. And I think as we head into this draft, even compared to the past couple years, this is the first time where, this Lions team is so built out and insulated in a lot of positions that it starts to balance that need, right, versus best player available. And, I was thinking to myself, do I think the Lions are one or two great players away from making a Super Bowl and potentially winning? And of course, that answer in my mind is yes, given the fact that we were 15-2 last year. It's just, as you look forward to the draft and just kind of previewing what happened in free agency, is, if I had to rate kind of where I would give Brad Holmes a ranking on free agency, for me, it would maybe be in that like B- range. I think the signing of DJ Reed was really great from a cornerback perspective. We needed that to come in and, fill in just to have that veteran corner on the team. Given some of the departures that we had, Terran Arnold obviously up and coming, but, you all obviously needed to replace Carlton Davis. So I think that was a great deal. You brought back Levi Onwuzurike for, a really, really great 1-year deal. You re-signed Derek Barnes for a couple years, but I think there's been a couple areas this offseason where I think everybody would say, are we significantly better right now before the draft than we were last year at the end of the year? Or even last year, obviously at this time. And, for me, I would say I kind of feel like we're, in terms of overall talent, the same talent level that we were last year, which by all means obviously got us to 15-2. We had some horrific injuries. It's just as you look to the draft this year, I keep asking myself, do I think Brad Holmes is going to take a different approach than he has in the past? Because again, I know we don't want to talk about, windows of opportunity, and Brad Holmes has been really big on that this offseason, pretty much saying, we want to build a sustained culture, a sustained group, and a sustained mindset of winning, right? They want this to be built for the long haul and not this kind of short blip in the radar. And so I think as you look at the draft prospects this year, which I'll run through in a couple minutes, I wonder for Brad if does his mindset change at all? Now, he's come out and said all the right things as he normally does. He's going to always pick best player available, which they've done in the past, obviously 3 to 4 years that he's been here. They've pretty much taken the best player available. They've had some stretches and some reaches, I think, when we saw that last year. But, a lot of those guys, I think we've drafted, 7 All-Pros since he's been here, which is just an incredible, incredible clip. One of the best in the NFL. And so as we head into this draft, I keep thinking in my mind, we got 5, 6 draft picks this year, and I'll run through kind of where those picks are. But, is this the time the Lions decide to make a big move? And the big question I've been thinking in my mind this past week, not that I have an answer on this yet, but, will the Lions desire to be good over a sustained period of time prevent them from being great for a short period of time and potentially winning a Super Bowl? Now, you may think that question sounds outrageous and, hey, of course we want sustained success. Why would we trade it in for this blip in the radar? And just that's what you hear from the organization at this point is I don't think there's an all-in, chips mentality here of, we're on tilt and we're going to, trade for, whatever players we can, even though we know it may only be a 1-year, flyer on a guy because, we think that guy could take us to the Super Bowl. That's just not how the Lions are going to do this. And every big free agent or trade that's come up, and the Lions' name is mentioned, I've just learned at this point that's not how Brad Holmes is going to operate. And winning is really hard. It's hard to create sustained success in this league. And so I have to give Brad Holmes all the credit for kind of where he's gotten us to now, which is this solid, strong foundation of young players that possess that grit mentality. But I can't help in the back of my mind wonder, is Brad Holmes going to have what it takes to make that one significant or 2 significant moves to push us over the top? And that may mean sacrificing some of the, long-term potential that we may have, or, giving up a first-round draft pick going after a guy that maybe only is going to be here for a year or 2 years. And I'm not saying you have to do that by any means. I just think if you look at Super Bowl history and a lot of these teams that have won it, look at the Eagles this past year, And that's maybe kind of the flavor of the month. And, obviously, what have you done for me lately type thing, where now everybody is just going to try to follow the Eagles mentality here. But if you look at Howie Roseman, right, Saquon Barkley last year, they really have gone for some of these big moves with the goal of kind of going for that Super Bowl in the moment. And I don't think it has to be one or the other. I'm either going to build for, sustained success, or I'm going to go all in. I was just really thinking about that question in my mind. The Lions are not accustomed to being in this situation. They just are not. And from a fan's perspective too, I'm not used to being in this situation. I feel uneasy at times because I don't necessarily know how to feel about this upcoming season, even how to feel about last year, going 15-2 and, having 17 Sundays just totally dialed in on the Lions, knowing that they had a damn good chance to win those games, and some of the the heartache that we had at the end of the year, but just so many great moments throughout the regular season, is really, what is it going to take to get to Lions to be great? And one thing I was thinking of today was, I equate this a lot to the Detroit Tigers, run that we had in, the mid 2000s into kind of, the 2010, 2012, kind of that whole JV era, Miggy, Victor Martinez. Dave Dombrowski, if you look at that time, we ultimately weren't able to get over the hump, but he made some big moves. And baseball is different than football, granted, smaller roster, a lot of minor league development. You tend to be able to more easily trade unproven guys for proven vets, et cetera. Not a capped league in terms of budget, all those things aside. But when I look back to the Detroit Tigers of those years, we had some incredible runs. I mean, just some great runs to the postseason. And I think back and wonder, would I have traded, say, 3 of those years to get one World Series? And the answer for me is a resounding yes. I look back on those years with, happiness and glad that they were good for so long, but they were never able to get over the hump. And they made the moves that they needed to make, and the bullpen was never where it needed to be. And, they had 4 Cy Youngs on their roster at one point, or futures, Cy Young guys. But I think it's something just I want you to think about from a Lions fan perspective. This is not me being negative and saying it's over or anything like that. It's just more, as we monitor the Lions moving forward, is that desire for them to be a sustained good organization going to prevent them from being great and winning a Super Bowl? And I think we hear this a lot on local radio. They talk a lot about, everyone's so worried about winning 2 or 3 Super Bowls. Let's try to get one first. And I think I definitely fall into that mantra, where I do think a window is real in the NFL. And if you look at the Lions roster right now, where it sits, a lot of these young, cheap draft picks that Brad Holmes selected are going to be coming due for a contract. And there are going to be some hard decisions that have to be made. There's been some rumors today going around about Jameson Williams. Is there some smoke there with, Albert Breer, I think, came out and said there was some rumblings that they might be looking to potentially trade JMO. He's only got this year and next year left on his deal. They have to pick up the 5th-year rookie option because he was a first-round pick, which is hopefully just more going to be a formality. And I saw that in the back of my mind, and I thought, I know we got to pay all these guys, but damn, our team's way better with Jameson Williams, and we're more likely to win a Super Bowl either this year or next than we are without him. And I'm not in the camp of saying I want to trade JMO for a 2nd-round pick for a guy I don't know if he's going to be any good because it's going to be cheaper in 2 years. That's just not how I think about things. I see JMO as an asset on our books now. That's no longer, he's not a liability at this point, right? He's not dragging some heavy contract on the books. And that's a guy that I want to keep around, at least as long as this window is open. Am I signing into another contract? Probably not. But hey, he walks, I get a compensatory pick, and onward we go. But I think the Lions are at a real crossroads here. You see it, they have a ton of cap space. They didn't spend a lot this offseason at all. They really kind of had these lower key signings outside of DJ Reed. They didn't really address the defensive line or defensive end. We'll get into that for the draft, which I still think is a glaring need for them. They lost some depth on the offensive line with Kevin Zeitler departing. Graham Glasgow did not have a great year last year, and we know that everything gets fueled from the offensive line. And they lost their defensive and offensive coordinators and some other guys throughout the organization, that kind of followed those coaches to their new team. So I think Brad Holmes is going to, we're going to find out here over the next, 12 to 16 months with this year heading into 2026. Because I think after that 2026 season is when things are going to get tough. I view this as really having the way that the Lions are currently built, having 2 more years kind of in this window before, guys like Sam Laporta, Brian Branch, Kirby Joseph is up for a contract after this year. There's going to be some tough choices that are going to have to be made because you can't just keep everybody. And so just something to think about yourself, or think to yourself, just as you monitor these moves from Brad Holmes. I just love playing that trick in my mind of, would I trade in 4 years of being great and winning the division for 1 Super Bowl? And the answer is yes. I would trade 5 years of not being great for 1 Super Bowl. That's just the way that I think. Look at the Pistons. We look back on them in 2004 when they ultimately won the title and how great that was. Just what a special, special time that was in the city. And that team is special because they won an NBA championship. So as we look forward to the draft, as I said, I think really a big draft coming up here for the Lions specifically, just kind of given where they're at. If you look kind of last year, just recapping kind of what the Lions did last year, Brad Holmes had an incredible first 3 drafts. I think if you look at last year, it was very similar to this year in the fact that there wasn't a ton of, opening roster spots where there was going to be starters, which is where I think you saw kind of where the depth came into play last year. But they ultimately picked, Terrion Arnold with that first pick number 24, they traded up. They got Ennis Rakestraw in round 2. Giovanni Manu in round 4, they traded up to get him, kind of a really big developmental offensive lineman from British Columbia. Sione Vaki, they picked in round 4 as well. They traded up to get him. Makai Wingo was in, round 6, and then Christian Mahogany. If you look at just the overall contribution from those players last year, Arnold obviously was a big contributor, played most of the year, and Vaki played special teams. Wingo didn't really get much time because he ultimately ended up hurting his knee. Christian Mahogany ended up starting at the end of the year. So, compared to previous drafts, there wasn't a ton of impact from a lot of these guys in the first year, which, like I said, firing off 7 guys at an all-pro clip, that's a hard thing to duplicate for Brad Holmes. And I think this draft is going to be a little bit similar in the sense that they're really looking for 1 to 2 guys that can maybe come in and start, and the rest are going to be depth pieces. And that to me is just it's different. It's right. I think it's a bit harder to draft when it's not some easy pick and you're picking at number 7 or you have some high draft pick. This is where these GMs ultimately earn their money, is in these situations where you're just a little bit lower in the draft. And we know Brad Holmes loves to be aggressive on draft night. That's one of the best things about him. I think free agency is not somewhere that he loves to play in. He loves to get aggressive in the draft. And we've seen that a couple times, the way that he trades up, moves picks, etc. If you look at the picks for the Lions this year for the 2025 draft, they have a total of 7 draft picks. So they are picking in round 1, pick number 28. They have their own second round pick in round 2, number 60. They're picking the 3rd round, number 102 overall. That is a compensatory pick for Aaron Glenn, who went over to the Jets. Then in the 4th round, they're picking 130 overall. Then they have 1 6th round pick and then 2 7th round picks. So a total of 7 draft picks. We haven't seen the Lions necessarily use all their draft picks. Brad Holmes kind of likes to pair some of those 5th, 6th picks, 5th, 6th, and 7th round picks, and kind of pair those together to move up into the draft, to go after the guy that he wants to. If we think about needs for the Lions, then I want to jump into a really good article I saw from Dave Burkett. People were talking a little bit today just about it because Dave Burkett is so dialed in. He's a writer for The Freep, knows the Lions super well. If we just think about the Lions' needs and just where we're at kind of coming out of the offseason for those that maybe haven't been paying attention or, maybe are just behind and watching the Red Wings, Pistons, what have you, there's 2 big areas for me where I think potential starters need to be added. One is going to be the offensive line. This team is fueled by the success of the offensive line. We will go only as far as the protection of Jared Goff goes. Why do I feel like there is a need right now? It's really kind of two to three main things. One is Kevin Zeitler departed. He was an all-pro right guard last year that stepped in and played really, really well. He is now gone. He signed with the Tennessee Titans for more money. And so that essentially leaves, two spots on the offensive line. One would assume that Christian Mahogany, who again, 6th-round pick last year, is going to ultimately swing into one of those spots from a guard perspective. And then you still have Graham Glasgow on the roster that really did not have a great year last year. He's aging a little bit. 2 years left on his deal. He's probably going to be maybe your 6th offensive lineman that's going to rotate in, be a backup to Frank Ragnow, and also maybe be a swing guard depending on what they do in the draft. So I would say offensive line starter and or depth is a big point of emphasis for me. And the obvious in the room is going to be that defensive line, whether that's, more of a defensive end type player or maybe that nose tackle defensive line when someone that's going to play to the likes of an Aleem McNeil or a DJ Reader are going to give you that long-term contract control. Those are really the two main spots that I think the Lions have immediate needs where they could draft a player that could come in and immediately contribute. I've heard others talk about, is there room for additional depth on the cornerback side? I think there is with Arnold and Rakestraw, that are obviously young guys still on rookie deals. Like I said, DJ Reed, but you also have a guy like Amik Robertson that's heading into the last year of his deal. So maybe a little bit of room there. And then I think wide receiver is an underrated area of need for the Lions, a little bit aged right now in that department. You obviously have Amon-Ra St. Brown that just signed a deal last year. You have Jamison Williams, I just talked about. Is he going to get dealt? Is he not going to get dealt? Then you have Tim Patrick. Aside from that, you don't really have a guy there. You got Khalif Raymond. You don't really have another younger guy there on the wide receiver team that I think depth chart, I should say that they may need. And there might be some needs at linebacker as well, potentially with Alex Anzalone coming up on the last year of his deal. So that's really where I see the main needs of depth is going to be on the offensive and defensive lines as we kind of head into who the Lions might be able to draft. On the offensive line side, to me, it really is, if you look at Penei Sewell, he's young, he's healthy, he's going to be the future of this team, as evident by his massive contract extension last year. But, a guy like Frank Ragnow is aging. He's got, only a couple years left on his deal, which, I hope Frank at least finishes out his contract. He is going to make $15 million coming up this upcoming year. And then you have Taylor Decker, who you just re-signed too, but he's also getting long in the tooth. So I think this offensive line just needs to get younger just across the board, whether that's a starter or depth. And again, defensive line, no one could have saw that coming last year with all the injuries. So I think both of those two areas to me are where I would primarily focus on as we look forward to the draft. I thought about the best way to kind of run through who should the Lions draft. And Wilson made a good point when we were texting about setting this pod up. I believe he said something to the extent of, I'm not really good on any draft talk because Brad Holmes is ultimately going to do what Brad Holmes is going to do. And it is a great call out by Wilson that ultimately Brad's going to do what Brad wants to do. He's done that the past couple of years. Is he going to trade up? Is he going to stay? Is he going to get aggressive? Who knows? One thing about this organization, though, with Brad Holmes and Dan Campbell is I feel like they've been pretty honest about how they feel heading into a draft. We saw this last year where, each team can get these top 30 picks of these draft picks that can come in and just have kind of one-on-one interviews with the team outside of the combine. You only get 15 minutes at the combine. And the Lions last year, it was so obvious they were going to go on cornerback. I think they brought in like 15 corners, that came in pre-draft, and you just knew that was going to be an area that they were going to focus on. If you look at this year, it's been a bit more varied of kind of who they brought in. So I didn't really get a ton through the tea leaves from kind of who they brought in, but more so just listening to Brad Holmes talk, as I alluded to earlier. He's really sticking to we're going to take the best player available. And a lot, I think, when we go through some of these names, you have to think about is if you're the Lions and you're picking at pick number 28, you're going to have a couple options there. Given that you're at the end of the draft, first round, there's going to be teams that may potentially want to move up. Why do you want to move up? Because if you draft a guy in the first round, you get that extra fifth-year option that I was just alluding to on JMO. and some of our other first round draft picks. It just gives you another year of relatively cheap club control for a young and aspiring player. And so that's an area where teams may be looking to come into the first round toward the end, which could make that pick valuable for the Lions. The other piece there is picking at pick number 28. If you see a guy like they saw last year with Terrion Arnold sitting there at pick 24, 25, 21, that may be an area where you say, hey, we're willing to shelve out a third round pick to move up 7 spots and go get a guy. And that's where I think when you think about what are the Lions going to do this year, if they ultimately see their guy that they think can come in and be a difference maker, that can start for them and take them from being a good team to a great team because they have a high grade, Brad Holmes is going to jump up and go get him. We saw that with a guy like Jamison Williams, right? They moved up from pick 20, whatever it is, all the way up to pick number 12, and I think his first or second draft to go get JMO, knowing he wasn't even going to play for that entire year. That just shows that he's not afraid to be aggressive. And so I think my natural thing every year is I always think Brad Holmes is going to move up just because this is his time to shine. To use a famous Detroit thing that people love to say around here, let Brad cook. This is the time when Brad loves to cook, which is around the draft. But with that, we've also seen some stretches in the draft, right? Some reaches, I should say. I said stretches earlier too. I don't know if I'm tight or what the hell it is, but you look at a guy like Manu that they drafted last year, Giovanni Manu. They traded, I think, a 4th or 5th round pick last year to move up, which was a lot to give up for a guy that is potentially not even going to start and not even close to starting. Sione Vaki was a running back that really was more of a special teams guy. We're going to need some hits in this draft, I think, from some of these young guys. And again, if we can focus on offensive, defensive line, those guys generally can be plug and chug a little bit earlier. And so that's where I think if Brad is in the draft and he sees his guy, he's ultimately going to go up and get him. In terms of who do I think they're going to pick and where do I think they're going to go? First question, do I think Brad Holmes is ultimately going to draft best player available? Yes. I don't think Brad Holmes gives a shit what anybody thinks. But with that said, I do think there are certain positions on this team that Brad Holmes is not going to draft, even if the best player at that position is available. Take quarterback, for example, or running back. 2 positions that I think the Lions feel pretty set with from a starter and a depth perspective. I don't think they're going to jump up and make a move there. Same probably with the position like tight end, where even if it's the best player available, is tight end necessarily a massive need for them right now? I would say no. I think Brad Holmes, while he's going to draft best player available, I think he is going to try to weave in a little bit more of need. Now, he made jokes about it to the media of, oh, I just love need, just really mocking the fact that everyone says, oh, you got to draft on need. Brad Holmes isn't going to overdraft a guy he isn't in love with just because he has a need. He may overdraft a guy that he loves because he loves the guy, but he's not going to do it kind of being forced to make a move. So what have we heard in terms of rumbling? So I want to bring in an article I read from Dave Burkett. I mentioned this a little bit earlier. He's a Detroit Free Press writer, very, very dialed in. Dave knows the Lions, better than mostly everybody that I read, along with Justin Rogers too, who we're hopefully going to have on from the Detroit Football Network here post-draft to have a conversation of kind of how things ended up working out. He listed 5 prospects who could interest the Detroit Lions with the 28th pick in round 1 of next week's NFL draft, or in this case, 2 days from now. The first is going to be Donovan Ezeruku. Donovan Ezeruku is an edge, played for Boston College, 6 feet, 2.5, 248 pounds. So he plays that edge position. Again, he played for Boston College. There's been some ties with the Lions and some of the Boston College guys as well. He led the FBS with, 16.5 total sacks, 1.38 sacks per game, forced 3 fumbles, and won the Hendrick Award as the best defensive end in college football. Big thing for him, he's definitely a polished pass rusher, but he doesn't necessarily have the size to be an every down defensive end as a rookie. So this is someone that's going to be playing on the outside, but he is kind of a willing run defender, and he's been a captain. You got to look at those grit, kind of those grit factors here when you think about a guy like him. So this is where I think when you look at the Lions and how are they going to address the defensive line situation, whether that's a defensive end or an edge or somebody on the inside, is they have historically shied away from a pass rush specialist. And what I mean by that is the Lions value size, and they value guys that not only good are rushing the passer, but also can stop the run. I'll bring up a guy like James Houston, for example. At his best, James Houston was a situational pass rusher. You weren't going to play him on rush downs. He was going to be maybe that third down. You know they're in a passing situation. You want to get to the quarterback. Maybe they're running 4 wide receiver sets, so you know you're going to get single coverage. You know, you're not going to be getting double teamed at the line. That's similar to what somebody like Donovan Ezeruku right now probably initially in his first year would be. He's not going to be a 3-down back. Aiden Hutchinson is a 3-down edge guy. That's not what he's going to be. He's going to be more of a situational pass rusher. But again, based on where you're picking at pick number 28, the odds that you're going to get somebody that's going to be a 3-down starter from day one is going to be limited. So that was the first. So edge from Boston College. The next guy is going to be, which we've heard a lot about, is Shamar Stewart, defensive end from Texas A&M. This is a big dude, 6 feet, 6'5", 267 pounds. I mean, there's just so much to like about this guy. He played for Texas A&M, so played against some good competition. Obviously, and A&M did not have a great year last year. Ran a super fast 40, take the 40 for what you will. Really good vertical jump. Had 1.5 sacks in each of his first 3 seasons with the Aggies. Though his underlying pass rush metrics were strong. So he had, first pressure, 2 to 3 seconds, which is good. The thing is, there's not necessarily a consensus on kind of where he's going to go. It just depends. Is he somebody that can develop the needed weight, the needed size, and the needed patience to be an effective player? There's been, some questions too. Obviously, grit is a big, big thing for the Lions, and Texas A&M went through a lot last year. And I think that's where if a guy like that can continue to play hard for a team like that was kind of shit in the bed at the end of the year, that speaks volumes about him. I think he would be a good pick for the Lions. I think just given his size, I think he maybe grades as somebody that could be a little bit more of that, 3-down back as he develops. I think I see really edge or interior lineman as both needs for the Lions. So I think he could be somebody that they think about it. It's funny because I'm reading this quote from Mel Kiper Jr. that said, it's one of those roll of the dice or gamble on greatness, boom or bust, make your draft or break your heart. That's what this guy is potentially going to be. When he's at his best, Stewart is an absolute stud. Been some question marks right around his mentality, around some of the grit pieces. So we'll see if that ultimately ends up playing a role there. So those are 2 edge guys. Third is going to be Josh Simmons. I don't know why I have so much shh in my voice tonight, but Josh Simmons, offensive tackle from Ohio State. Simmons was, trending really, really well last year. He played for the Buckeyes, like I said. Tore his patella tendon, in his left knee in October. Prior to that, he was a 2-year starter at left tackle for Ohio State. He also played right tackle at San Diego State. His arms are a little bit smaller, which matters a lot for a tackle, but he's definitely one of the best, most agile guys from an offensive lineman perspective. Fun fact, Penei Sewell does not have super long arms as well, so that clearly doesn't matter for him. But the question is going to be, would you end up drafting a guy like Simmons knowing he's not going to play immediately? And this could be a potential long-term solution for a Taylor Decker. Maybe he could play a little bit of guard, but he's really shaping up to be more of a offensive tackle at this point. But, Decker's getting a little long in the tooth, maybe got 1 to 2 more years left. Does this guy become maybe your future guy that you end up drafting? But we'll see about that. Next is going to be another guy on the offensive line covering the positions that I like. And, I listen to a lot of sports talk. I listen to a lot of podcasts. I listen to a lot of radio. This guy might be the pick for me, and I'll give you some reasons why. This is Gray Zabel, offensive lineman, played for North Dakota State, 6'6", 312 pounds. Started all 14 games last year for North Dakota State at left tackle. Based on his size, he's going to project more as an interior lineman in the NFL. He's played right tackle. He's played left guard. To me, this is a guy that really could play anywhere on the offensive line, all the way from center to the guard spot to maybe even outside on the tackle spot. I think the Lions need to invest with the first round pick now on a replacement for Frank Ragnow, or at least a quality backup that can be in the lineup if needed if Frank's out. And I think Gray Zabel could be that guy. He's flexible, can go to any position. They clearly have a need on the guard side. Like I said earlier, with Kevin Zeitler moving on, you have Graham Glasgow and Christian Mahogany. Mahogany going into his second year, Glasgow coming off not a great year. The Lions cannot afford to lose any of their strength on the offensive line, which is where they've excelled. And this is where I think you just replenish that stock early on. I think you could wait, obviously, till the second round if you felt like that was the move for you. But I think if a guy like Zabel's sitting there, which I don't know if he will be with where they're picking, or maybe he's at pick 24 or 25, I think you jump ahead and you go get a guy like this. He has the grit. You know, he played at the Senior Bowl. He's just tough. He's just tough. Yes, he played for North Dakota State, but at the Senior Bowl, he played really, really well against the top competition, which is why I have faith, that he would be a great pick for the Lions offensive line. So I like him over a guy like Josh Simmons, just because Simmons is a bit more limited to be a tackle. And I think the Lions' more immediate need and long-term is getting younger at the guard position. And I think he would be an absolute great fit. So I'm aligned with Dave Burkett here. This last one was giving me bad vibes, and I'll tell you why. While I said that wide receiver is a need, I don't think it is a need at this point in the first round, knowing some of the other holes and disparities that we have on this team. So Matthew Golden was the other one that Dave Burkett noted here. He did come in for an official visit, which caused a little bit of stir, started getting some of the writers talking, and granted, they're hunting for a story right now as we're 2 days out from the draft, but Matthew Golden played for Texas. He's 5'11", 191 pounds, so he's not a super, super big receiver, bit more of that speed guy, similar to what you see in Jameson Williams, can really take the top off of a defense. He had the fastest 40-yard dash time among receivers at the combine. Was at Houston, transferred to Texas. So last year he had 58 catches for 987 yards, returned 2 kicks. So he's got a little bit special teams area. Not a great blocker, but is somebody that they could think about drafting, especially if they were ultimately to decide they wanted to trade Jameson Williams, which I will state right now, I am not a fan of trading Jameson Williams, given the situation that they are in and the fact that they are in a Super Bowl window, but he is a guy that they could potentially make a move for. And I've seen this in the past, and do I think a wide receiver versus a defensive end or offensive lineman is going to win you a Super Bowl? And I just don't think that is the answer. I think the Lions receiving core is good enough this year, assuming they draft somebody else in this draft. Let's say they take a receiver with a 3rd round pick, just to get a little bit younger at the position, or they end up signing a veteran after the draft, maybe just another free agent to have in here. I think they're good enough at receiver, because I think at this point you'd be bringing in Matthew Golden to be your 6th guy on offense. It's Amon-Ra, it's Sam Laporta, it's Jameson Williams, it's Jahmyr Gibbs, it's David Montgomery. Those are your horses. Then you got a guy like Tim Patrick, and then Matthew Golden probably fits in there. I just think the only way you're going to make a guy like Matthew Golden successful for the Lions is if Goff has enough time to throw him the damn ball, which is why I think having some additional focus on the offensive line is needed, because I'm concerned. I'm worried about the offensive line. We've grown accustomed to having a great offensive line. I want to make sure it stays great. And so while I think Golden could be a pick, if there's breaking news tomorrow that the Lions are trading Jameson Williams for a 2nd and 4th round pick, then I think all of a sudden a guy like Golden or even, Emeka Ibuka coming from Ohio State, like that definitely could be somebody that they think about for sure. Ibuka also, could be someone that they think about potentially if he's sitting there. If Brad Holmes is really going to be best player available and, Golden's sitting there at 28, I'm one of those people saying, maybe we got to trade back. Let someone else take him. Let's get some more depth on the offensive line and defensive line. We lost Ben Johnson. We got a lot of changes on the coordinator side. I want more of a guarantee. I want somebody that's more likely to work out and have an immediate impact. And I think that's on the offensive and defensive line. So Matthew Golden also listed. So those were the top 5 guys that Burkett ended up noting for the Lions. We'll see where he ultimately ends up going. I didn't want to sit here and give you 25 names of who could go because honestly, none of you probably care. You probably haven't watched a lot of these games anyways. That's why I tried to focus more on the positional need and where I think the Lions need to add from a positional standpoint versus a specific player in the draft. And if I haven't made it clear, I want to see some big boys on the O-line and the D-line. You build from the inside out. That's been Brad Holmes' mantra since he got here. It was the Penei Sewell pick. It was the Taylor Decker contract. It was just the drafting of Aiden Hutchinson, the drafting of a guy like Aleem McNeil. I think that's where the Super Bowl champions are made. And I think also if you look to next year, a guy like Aleem McNeil is coming off a major injury. Same with Aiden Hutchinson. They just don't have a ton of depth on the defensive line. DJ Reader's getting a little older, 1 year left on his deal. There's not a lot there right now. And could a guy like Zadarius Smith come back? Yes. But everybody else you got on that D line has just been injured or has not proven it over a long period of time. Marcus Davenport, when he's healthy, can be great, but he's never healthy. He's always hurt. What I don't want to be is in week 2 next year and Aiden's back, let's just say, and Davenport goes down again. And we're back in the exact same situation we were in this year, which is where I'd love to see them take an offensive lineman and maybe 1 to 2 defensive linemen, whether that's an edge or a guy interior lineman to maybe get a little bit younger when DJ Reader ends up moving on. So we'll see ultimately what the Lions end up doing. Hey, is Brad going to trade up? Is he going to stay put? Is he going to trade back? Do I think Holmes is picking at 28? I don't. You know why? Because he doesn't like staying at his pick. He normally likes to move up. Maybe he'll move back this year. So yeah, we'll see. We'll see what happens. But hopefully that was helpful. Just a quick run through on the Lions draft. I think they'll ultimately end up going on the defensive line, but we'll see what shakes. Before we wrap, I wanted to cover one thing that I saw today briefly. This is not related to the draft, but it is Lions related. And it is from the one and only Mr. President of the Detroit Lions, Rod Wood. Rod the Bod Wood. So famously, Lions president Rod Wood at his press conference when he got hired said he knows absolutely nothing about football and will not be involved in any football decisions. Yet, when we see the Lions draft, Rod Wood is getting body slammed from Dan Campbell, celebrating along with Sheila when they pick their picks, which is just hilarious to me. If you watch any of those videos, it's Brad Holmes talking to Dan Campbell, and you just have this little weasel in the back that is Rod Wood trying to listen in what's going on. Anyway, so Brad Holmes was at the Detroit Economic Club talking about Detroit's attendance record at the NFL draft and talking about Green Bay. And Rod Wood doesn't play on the field. Rod Wood is not an NFL player, but Rod Wood started talking some shit. What did Rod Wood say? This was on Green Bay and them hosting the NFL draft and the Detroit attendance record. I don't think they'll ever top it. There's no way Green Bay will come close. They'll finish second or they'll finish third like they did last year in reference to where they finished in the division. I'm all about talking a little smack. I don't want to hear that from Rod Wood. I just don't need to hear it. Hey, Rod, let's zip it up. Okay? Let's have a little integrity here. Okay? Let's act like we've been here before, because saying this is what? Bulletin board material. And the Lions should know better than anybody else because they love bulletin board material. the Packers are going to be a great team this year again. They're going to be a tough out. And I know we've played them well. We've had Matt LaFleur's card. I get it. Jordan Love, what is he? Is he any good? Who knows? Don't care. I just don't want to hear this. I don't want to hear it from Rod Wood. Dan Campbell wants to say it. Totally different for me. Some players want to say it. Okay. I don't need to hear that from the president of the Lions. So, Rod, let's go ahead and just let's pipe down. Go fix the Wi-Fi. Go get the ticket sales up. Do whatever to get the locker room fixed. I saw that they got a new locker room this year. Just stick to that. Let's not dabble in the football stuff because you made it clear in your press conference that you don't know anything about football decisions. So let's not start talking smack in the middle of April about a team that was pretty damn good last year just to give them some bulletin board material. I always like the quote, speak softly and carry a big stick. That's kind of how I live my life, and that's how I want the Lions to do. We're special because we got a chip on the shoulder. The way you keep that chip is what Dan Campbell always does. You try to create an environment where you are the aggrieved, right? You are the ones that are getting negatively talked about and just always trying to find that next edge. I just don't need to hear this from Rod Wood. So anyways, just a fun little quote that I wanted to end the pod with because I saw that pop up earlier from Will Birchfield, who writes for Fox 2 on the Lions. So anyways, yeah, so that's it. That's Robbie's 46-minute kind of draft preview and kind of where the Lions sit going into the draft. I'm super excited about Detroit sports, folks. So excited. I'm wearing my grit hat. Cannot wait for NFL to start. I'm going to enjoy this Pistons ride and this Tigers ride while I can. We'll have some Red Wings offseason moves hopefully coming at some point. And then we'll jump into football season. We know football is king. Can't wait to see our boys. I want a Super Bowl, guys. I want a Super Bowl real bad. And, I hope this team can be great and we can go get one because it would be awesome. So make sure to tune in to Wilson and Steve. Like I said, we'll probably be dropping a pod. Should be coming out probably Thursday morning of the draft ahead of the Pistons game as well. And then we'll be on next week to kind of do our post-draft recap. Going to try to have Justin Rogers on from the Detroit Football Network at some point here soon to kind of get his take on the roster, heading into the summer here and before we get into rookie OTAs and then obviously more formal OTAs. So thanks for listening. Make sure to rate, review, subscribe. If you have any comments too, we would absolutely love to hear those on the pod. We're all about feedback. I'll probably wait to read any comments till the boys are back next week. But anyways, yeah. So thanks again for listening. Go Lions, go Pistons. And yeah, we will see you next time on another episode of Take the Points, a true underdog podcast. See you, everybody. Go Leos.